Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the June 26th meeting of the Lancaster City Council Finance Committee. It is 6 p.m. The first item we have on the agenda is Resolution 71-23. It's a resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids for the Fetters Run Ohio University Lancaster Stream Restoration Project. It's coming out of Water Wastewater. Mr. James.
Thank you, Chairman McDaniel. I'd like to invite Stephen Wellstead to the podium for a little bit more explanation on this. He sent some really good emails out to everyone, and I think we'll put this on public record. So, Stephen, you got the floor.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening, everybody. As noted, this is just simply a resolution to authorize advertising for bids on this stream restoration project we have. It's going to cover about 1,400 feet of stream on OUL's property there along Fetters Run. It's going through this Ohio EPA Water Resource Restoration Sponsorship Program. So it's a great thing in that all of the construction costs, which we're estimating at $1.7 million currently, are covered by this program. So we're wanting to hopefully get this project fit out here within a couple months, and hopefully see this done. One thing I will note that wasn't in the email, and I know the council committee is aware of it, I do want to put a little disclaimer here in that, so right now there's one issue that is holding up this project currently is the fact that as part of this program, Ohio EPA establishes an environmental covenant on the property, basically to ensure that the investment being made is going to be protected going into the future. As part of those terms, they do require a perpetual environmental covenant. OUL, or OU at least, some folks inside the university have had concerns with that. So, but that's something the OEPA is sticking on and not going to be negotiating on. So we're hopeful that OU will agree that the benefits of the project outweigh their concerns about the negatives there with having the perpetual agreement, but it's still to be determined what their final decision is on that. It's possible if they come back and say they're not going to agree to that this project will not be able to move forward, but after discussing with the council committee, we determined to keep it on track on the schedule we want. If they do agree, we should go ahead and introduce the legislation now and get its full 3 readings. Again, hopefully everything goes well and we'll be able to bid it, but if they come back and say no, then this legislation may end up needing to be withdrawn or taken off the table. So just wanted to make you all aware of that.
Thanks for bringing that to everybody's attention. That's kind of an important point.
Yeah.
Questions for Mr. Wellstead? Mr. James, what's your pleasure?
Mr. Matlin will be my second, and this will go for 3 readings.
All right. Mr. Matlin will be the second on 7123, and we'll go for 3 readings. The next item on the agenda is Resolution 7223, a resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for the design of the East Main Street Sewer Separation Project. Water, wastewater, Mr. James.
Thank you again, Chairman McDaniel. Stephen, you still got the floor.
Yeah, thank you. So this project is a sewer separation project. This is one that is on our compliance schedule with our NPDES permit through Ohio EPA that we are required to do related to our combined sewer overflows that we have here in the city. So this project will involve a storm sewer, construction of a new storm sewer to separate the combined sewer area along East Main Street and East Wheeling Street, kind of in the vicinity between Baldwin Run there by the bank and the Kroger, the shopping center there, and then all the way on the west end towards Starrett Street. This project, we have had some preliminary engineering done to look at the feasibility, concerns with utility conflicts, those sorts of things. We're ready to move into the design phase, final design, prepare plans and whatnot for construction. And we have the number we received from our engineer, and so we're asking for authorization of a contract up to $450,000 to get that design done and again prepare us for construction hopefully next year.
Any questions for Mr. Wellstead? Okay, Mr. James, what's your pleasure?
Ms. Teener will be the second, and we're going to respectively ask for 2 readings based on some schedule issues with trying to get the thing out to bid.
Yeah, thank you. Just to save them or get them started on that design 1 month earlier and avoid having to wait all the way to mid-August, the hope was 2 readings would be amenable to City Council.
Okay, Mrs. Teener will be the second on 7223, and 2 readings. I would note that we only have 1 council meeting in July, so that also comes into play here.
Yes.
So, the next item on the agenda is Resolution 7323, a resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids for the Independence Boulevard and East Main Street culvert replacement projects. This is also coming out of water, wastewater. Mr. James.
Thank you again, Chairman McDaniel. Stephen, you still have the floor.
Thank you. So this project here involves 3 existing undersized culverts that we're going to replace. I've actually been before you previously for the Independence Boulevard portion. The culvert up there, we originally planned to do as a standalone project. We put it out for bid earlier this year, and unfortunately, no bidders, nobody submitted a bid. So our hope is that, now separately, we've also been working on this culvert replacement project on East Main between Sells Road and Linwood Lane. There's 2 culverts there, again, undersized, need to be replaced to bring them up to design standards, current design standards. And so our hope or thought was let's combine all those culvert replacements into one project, make it a little bigger, hopefully attract some contractors and again, get a successful bid this time, hopefully. So we're working on putting the final touches on the plans and contract documents for that project to replace all 3 culverts and looking to, again, advertise for bids hopefully next month on that one.
Okay.
Questions on 7323? Your pleasure, Mr. James.
Mr. Matlin will be my second on that, and we once again will respectfully ask for 2 readings on that one as well.
2 readings on 7323 with Mr. Matlin as the second. The next item on our agenda is Resolution 7423, a resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for construction administration services on the Independence Boulevard and East Main Street culvert replacement project. I believe this is related to 7323, Mr. James.
That is correct. Once again, Stephen?
Yeah, same project. Again, on this one, like I said, we're looking to go ahead and bid. The contract we have with our engineer on that project currently only goes through the bid, but we do retain the services of an engineer to assist us in, with construction administration services throughout our projects. That's pretty standard. So we need to create or agree to a contract amendment for those services. And again, this legislation would just authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into that amendment so that we have those services when construction occurs.
Any questions on 7423? Mr. James?
Thank you again. Ms. Teener will be my second on that, and that one can actually go 3 readings.
Ms. Teener be the second on 7423 and 3 readings on that. All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Stephen. Are there any departmental updates? Chief Snyder?
Good evening. I just want to update council and the citizens on a couple pieces of information I think will hold some pretty high value. We're about 6 months into the budget year, and I'm a firm believer anytime you put time or effort or money, especially into a project or initiative, it's important to get feedback, probably more important to get feedback on it. So 2 projects we ran at the beginning of the year, the Axon body camera upgrade initiative and the K9 program are now about 6 months in. And there's 2 real-world circumstances or updates that I want everyone to know to see basically where their bang is going for their buck. So our Axon body camera system, what we were wearing was pretty antiquated with low resolution, low technology, low audio quality. And we were just trying to bring it up to current standards. And with council's continued support and the citizens' continued support, we were able to do so. And so our officers are wearing that newer technology. Just the other night, a couple days ago, I could bring in any number of court cases or any number of investigations our detectives have where this technology has helped them, and it has. But I just have to look 2 days ago to see where it actually has impacted officer safety. And I can't get into details because it's an ongoing investigation, but I can tell you the fact patterns of the case. We had an officer get into a pretty violent altercation with the subject on the southwest side with a wanted individual that fled the scene. And during the altercation, the body camera was ripped off of his chest and landed in the suspect vehicle's car. And because this is current technology and any piece of major police equipment in the last 5 years has GPS or some type of location service in it, because of this upgrade, we were able to locate the vehicle in the Columbus area. And with that, when officers were locating the vehicle, they found what they believed to be a handgun in the vehicle as well. Now, the rest of the details for that, we'll wait till the close of the investigation. But that directly impacts our officers, and it directly impacts bringing someone to justice for doing a pretty abhorrent act. Not to mention, if my officer had been shot or seriously injured, that'd be a lot of 24-hour work days for us until they were brought to justice, and this would have been a much quicker means to that end. So I just want to take this time to personally thank and show everyone how their investment in our agency is working. And like I said, that's just one example of where that had already paid off, but I could march maybe 50 or 100 more up here with our body cameras. The second one with the K-9 program, it went active around May 19th of this year and is currently active up to current day. And I think the best way to really reflect the outcome of finally implementing that much needed tool in our city is to just do some comparative results. So today I just worked on some numbers, and I ran a 3-year average of May 19th to June 25th through the past 3 years. So 20, 21, and 22, that 3-year average of that about 30-day time frame versus the 2023 numbers. And so there's a lot of factors here. This is raw data, so don't read too far into this is K-9 only. But I think the numbers will jump out at you as far as what they're related to. And the 3-year average for 20, 21, and 22 was right around 280-ish traffic stops for that 30-day period. And in 2023, we completed 575 traffic stops. Now, again, that's going to have something to do with just different styles of policing, different initiatives and things, but double the numbers is pretty darn hard to accomplish without some motivating factor. Beyond that, there were 3 other categories that I measured for that 3-year time frame, or 3-year average, I'm sorry, not 3-year time frame. It's a 30-day time frame, 3-year average. The 3 other categories I looked at were felony level or potentially felony level arrests from the traffic stops, drug-related interactions, meaning drug seizures, whether that resulted in an arrest or not, and then just specifics, like if we recovered a gun or recovered stolen property. So the 20, 21, and 22 average for arrests that are felony level or potentially felony level was 12 during that 30-day time frame. In 2023, we had 26 felony level arrests from those stops. Drug-related incidents during that time frame, right around 5 for the 3-year, 30-day average, and we jumped that up to 19. And then the final measure was in that 3-year time frame for the 30-day average, it looked like around maybe 1 gun or 1 firearm was located out of those stops in that time frame, and we've located 2 firearms in that time frame. More importantly, of the 26 K-9 deployments that we've had since May 19th, 8 of them had positive indications. And at first, you'll think, why only 8? Well, that's actually a great statistic for us because it shows that every time we deploy that K-9, it's not going to open air indicate for narcotics on a car. That's kind of a false belief in pop culture that when we deploy a K-9, that's just how we get into a car, and that's simply not true. Officer trains at a very high level, and it's nice that number or that ratio is at that average. But out of those 26 deployments, 8 indications. The most measurable stat from that, and I'm sorry for referring to a piece of paper here, but I just don't have this in my time today to remember. We had recovered 8 grams of methamphetamine, 2 grams of fentanyl, 1 item or object of cocaine, meaning they just didn't get a correct measurement on it at that time, and the same for pills or prescription, that was 5. So basically blew the doors off of that 3-year average before. And I think that everybody in here deserves an update on that to see the efficiency of this tool. And when I asked late in 2022 to budget the second K-9, the first was grant funded and drug seizure funded. Again, with the support of council and the support of the citizens, we almost have our second officer graduating from training with that second K-9. And I'd like to add more because I think that these results speak for themselves as far as drug interdiction. So again, raw data, there's plenty of factors at play, but to go from the 270 or 280 range to 570 or 580 range, there's motivating factors there. There's a morale factor there. There's a finally we have a tool factor. The most important stat that I recorded, however, and again, our CAD system, which is currently being upgraded, is bad. It's good now, but it was very bad before, so I'm relying on that. The times we requested a K-9 during that 30-day average period in the last 3 years was 13. So right around 13 times in that 30-day time period we'd request. Of the 13 times, we averaged around 2 of a positive response, meaning that twice out of 13 times you'd get OSP or the Fairfield County Sheriff's Office or Logan PD to assist with us, which, that does us no good in the real world. With the K-9 on the street, we're only out there 8 hours, but with the second K-9, that will help augment that. But I think already it's located 4 people on active tracks already, and that's a big deal. 1 of them was a suspect apprehension, and 3 were what we call MPs, or just missing individuals, and that's a capability we didn't have before. So I just want everybody to be updated there, and I think especially for the citizens, it's important to see what you're getting out of your investment with us. So if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Just one quick one. The officer in the altercation, is he all right?
He's okay. Yeah,
Okay.
he's fine.
Any other questions for Chief Snyder? That's a really good update. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other departmental updates? Okay, thank you. Tonight's meeting prep, Mr. Porter.
Yes, tonight we have temporary ordinance 1423, the planning and zoning code revisions. That's coming from code enforcement. And we also have a special presentation this evening from Holly Maddie, who was involved in that project, and that will be taking place during the regular meeting.
Great, thank you. Are there any other items for finance? Any other items for finance? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make that motion.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. It is 6:17 p.m.
The Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. Feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our 2 locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.
Hi, I'm Julia Hilty with AHA here in Lancaster. AHA is a children's museum that surrounds children and the adults in their lives with a hands-on, interactive, playful, and educational environment featuring over 60 exhibits. This month, we are honored to be chosen by the Buckeye Automotive Family's Buckeye Cares program. Buckeye Cares will make a generous donation with every car they sell. From all of us at AHA, we say thank you, Buckeye, for helping us help our kids.
ask that you join me for a moment of silent reflection and prayer. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things that we cannot change. Grant us the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I call this meeting of Lancaster City Council for June 26, 2023 to order, and ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call, please.
Mr. Ehlers?
Here.
Mr. Ailes?
Here.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Here.
Mr. James?
Here.
Mr. Matlin?
Here.
Mr. McDaniel?
Here.
Mr. Porter?
Yes, here.
Mr. Schoonover?
Here.
And Mrs. Teener?
Here.
Reading and disposing of the journal.
Mr.
Excuse me.
President, I'd like to make a motion that we excuse President Wool from the meeting.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Reading and disposing of the journal.
I'd like to present the regular meeting minutes dated June 12th, 2023.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the journal.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Reports of city officials.
Email dated June 19th, 2023 regarding city council meeting on June 26th, submitted by Peter Vale, zoning administrator. Email dated June 20th, 2023 regarding city council meeting on June 26th, submitted by Mr. Porter. Series of emails regarding requests for legislation submitted by Mr. Ehlers. Email dated June 21st, 2023 regarding requests for legislation submitted by Peter Vale, zoning administrator. Email dated June 22nd, 2023 regarding requests for legislation submitted by Mr. Matlin. Email dated June 23rd, 2023 requesting request for legislation submitted by President Ohl. Email dated June 23rd, 2023 regarding request for legislation submitted by Mr. Ailes. Email dated June 23rd, 2023 regarding request for legislation submitted by Mr. Porter. And a series of emails dated June 26, 2023 regarding the June 26, 2023 Finance Committee agenda submitted by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of city officials.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, tonight we do have a special presentation. Oh, sorry, communications. We have communications.
There are none to be presented.
Thank you very much. So tonight we do have a special presentation from Holly Matty, and this is in relation to temporary ordinance 1423.
Sorry, I didn't want us to be blinded by it.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. Tonight, we are going to be introducing the new proposed zoning code for the city of Lancaster. It's been about a year process. We're going to talk through what that process was and how we got from where we started to where we are today and what next steps are after this point tonight. Sounds good. And do I advance the slides by the arrow? How do you want me to? Oh, wait, maybe I can do it this way. There we go. I can do it that way. All right, so this is the process that we started. Again, just about a year ago, we entered into the contract and we started with a stakeholder engagement process that included a series of stakeholder interviews with landowners, developers, different business entities, the Chamber of Commerce, and those types of stakeholders that would have interest in a zoning code going forward. At the same time, my consultant group reviewed the existing code and identified areas where we thought improvements could be made, areas where we thought we wanted to keep that portion of the code, and created a document that we ended up combining with the stakeholder interview process, as well as our community engagement. So our community engagement was a survey that was sent out to the residents and business owners of the city of Lancaster. It was disseminated through social media and different platforms of those sorts. There were several hundred responses that we received back, and that was through late August into early September that we conducted that survey. We had things in the survey regarding setbacks, signage, architectural requirements, building materials, and landscaping and things for downtown Lancaster as well. We combined all that into what we refer to as the code diagnostic report. That outlines everything during our discovery phase as far as what the stakeholders were telling us, what we heard from the community, and what we think needed to happen to the existing code based upon that feedback. We presented that code diagnostic report to a stakeholder committee that we worked with through the next year to guide this process. The stakeholder committee comprised of the mayor, the service director, Pete Vale as your zoning official, Felicia as your new planner. We also had one BZA representative, one planning commission representative, Jan, who is here tonight, sat on the board representing the planning commission. We also had a realtor perspective. We had a couple of residents. We had 2 city council members. We had Jack Madeline and Don that were here, that participated in every meeting and helped guide that process. From the code diagnostic report, we created a series of 3 drafts of the code over the next year. We spent significant time with that stakeholder committee. Most places will do a 2-hour working session to get through a zoning code. We did 2 2-hour reviews for at least 2 of them, and I believe one of them we did 3 2-hour reviews. So we met 3 different times on one draft and 2 times on each of the other drafts. So there was significant input, significant revisions, a lot of discussion. And what I really liked about the group is that they didn't always agree. That's why we spent so much time on it. And one group would say one thing, and then the other group would say the other thing. But at the end of the day, we always came together with a conclusion and a way to resolve the issue that satisfied both entities or both sides of the whatever topic we were discussing at the time. The other thing I want to point out is that I sent the draft code to the building industry. It was actually draft 2 that I sent to them. I wanted to get through the first draft with the steering committee, get the input, make a second draft, and then get that in the hands of the building industry of the association. I was very happy when I received a voicemail from John Melke from the BIA of Central Ohio telling me that he had a group from Fairfield County that does work in Fairfield County review the code, and they had no significant comments on the code. They were actually very pleased with it. I actually got phone calls from a couple of the developers thanking me for the code. So I was very pleased with that. There's a lot of pieces in there that are addressing the missing housing, and they were very happy with that. There's 50-foot lots, there's 40-foot lots, there's 80-foot lots too, but there are a variety of lot sizes to help promote the different types of housing that are needed within Central Ohio and addressing the housing shortage that we have today. So I just want to point out that that is a significant feather in Lancaster's cap to have the BIA give that kind of feedback. We are in the process of getting that in writing as well, and we'll have that to you shortly. That brought us to the public hearing draft. When we got to the end of the third draft, there were very minimal changes that we were coming out of that draft with. So the stakeholder committee recommended that we move forward to the public hearing with the Planning Commission, with those small changes being made prior to going to Planning Commission. So we made those changes, put out the public hearing draft, did our advertisement for the Planning Commission, and we held that public hearing on June 8th. At that hearing, we had some feedback regarding specifically the architectural standards. We also had some minor comments on different areas. We addressed all of the minor comments that were brought up to us, and at that time, the Planning Commission decided to keep the architectural requirements as is in the code, and unanimously recommended approval of the code, the public hearing draft, with the minor revisions. Those minor revisions were made to the code prior to sending it to council for your 3 readings and public hearing. Tonight is the first reading. We felt that it was important to give a presentation at the first reading so that you understand the code and the process that we took to get to where we are today. We'll have a second reading on July 17th, and then it's been confirmed that the public hearing will actually take place on August 14th. If everything goes well on August 14th, if it were to be adopted, it would go into effect 30 days later. So what are some of the major changes that were made? I mentioned the housing changes, and this is a little hard to see from back here, so hopefully up closer you can see it a little better. But down the left-hand side is the existing residential zoning districts within the city of Lancaster. And it lists the minimum lot sizes and the minimum frontage requirements within the current code. Then in the middle, in the bold, are the proposed zoning districts in the new code, and then it shows how they correlate to the existing zoning districts. We kept the residential estate district, which is your large estate district for larger suburban type style housing. We felt like that was a need to at least accommodate those housing styles that are here today and provide any ability for those in the future if the demand were there. We did combine the RS1 and the RS2 because those were 100-foot and 75-foot lots in both of those districts. We are not really seeing the demand for a 100-foot lot. If we see something that's larger, 150 makes sense. The 100 and the 75 just aren't as prevalent in today's world. So we combined those and put those down to the 75-foot frontage. And then the RS3, this is one that I think is significant, and I think it's significant to the BIA. We put this in here, it's medium density. We took it down from what you were considering medium density at 7,560 feet of frontage down to 5,050 foot frontage. This is really a missing piece that Lancaster had. It is a common lot size and frontage that developers are pursuing. And actually, in my time of visiting the Planning Commission and the BZA, I saw a number of cases come before the Planning Commission through the PUD process looking for that 50-foot lot, or going into the RS4 because they wanted a 50-foot lot and the RS3 didn't allow it. So they had to go to the RS4, which would allow really a 40-foot lot. So you would allow something smaller just to allow that 50-foot. So this really provides a district specific for that unit type. And then the RS4, we kept it we lowered it to 4,000 square feet and kept the 40-foot frontage. We revised this district to be called the transitional residential. This district is something that I think is going to benefit the community significantly because it allows for those transitional uses. It allows for those houses on those smaller lots intermingled with commercial, residential, commercial retail, commercial restaurants, commercial office uses. You'll see that along that first ring just outside of the central business district where we have houses intermingled with these offices and business uses. One of two things is happening in those situations. One is that they could be businesses in a non-conforming residential district, meaning they're non-conforming and they can't really do anything other than what they're doing today without being illegal. Or they are conforming in a business district and you see spot zoning all around those residential districts. This district creates the transitional district that allows those uses to intermingle together in a mixed-use scenario, which is a very common phenomenon in today's planning world, and takes us back to what we saw in our roots of planning, of those uses working together. So this is a district that we're going to be seeing on those outer rings of just outside the central business district and help create uses that are conforming and eliminate non-conforming situations. So this is what we put in our code diagnostic report, much more intensive report than this, but this just is a summary of it, showing what the existing districts are and what the proposed districts are in your current numbering system, so that it provides an easy cross-reference of what it is today versus going forward. We did condense a lot of the development standards into one section for user-friendly purposes. That brings us to our code layout. We are trying to make this code more user-friendly by consolidating everything into more tables, more graphics, and being able to visually display that to people utilizing the code. So we have a use chart. We have two use charts. This is the residential use chart, and then there's also a commercial industrial use chart. Everything is color-coded, so everything that's yellow is single-family type residential, and then the green, showing up more cream on there, the green is the mixed-use type districts, and then blue, when we get to the next slide, is commercial and industrial. And what this allows users of the code to do, you can do one of two things. If you own property and you know you're zoned commercial neighborhood, you can go to commercial neighborhood, go down that column, and know what uses are allowed in that particular district. But on the flip side, if you are a developer and you have a use that you are particularly trying to target, but you don't know where it would go in the code, then you can go down the use side, find your use, and then go across to find where in the city that would be allowed. Whereas right now, you have to flip through all of your codes to find that information. So it really expedites that for the users of the code. And then instead of having list or text of every single zoning district and all the uses and repeating the uses over and over, we created a 4-page layout for each zoning district. So it starts with the purpose of the district. It includes target areas, so areas within your community that make sense for this type of district, followed by the permitted uses, which refer you back to that use table, followed by your development standard table, showing your lot size, your maximum density, your frontage, setbacks, what kind of encroachments you're allowed, and those sorts of things. And then the last 2 pages are graphics of what it looks like, a typical layout for that district. And then also your cross-references to any general development standards that are required for your particular district. Some of the other major changes that we made within this code revolve around landscaping. We heard a lot about landscaping during the stakeholder process and the community engagement process. Stakeholders, business owners, they want landscaping, but they don't want it to be so extensive that it's cost prohibitive, and then also, it's expensive for maintaining. Residents wanted more landscaping. They felt like the code lacked landscaping currently. So we feel like we've provided a balance of landscaping standards that would include parking lot screening, also allows for adjustments to that screening based upon elevation, because we know we have some elevation changes in the city. So where elevation acts as a natural screening barrier, we allow that to take place. And landscaping between specific uses that may be not as compatible together. The other nice thing about this is that ODNR reached out to the city during this process regarding some of their urban forest standards. And at that point in time, we were able to come together with them and kind of mimic some of the things that they already would like to see in a city like Lancaster into the code. So we were able to address some of their comments as well. And then we also included redevelopment language to help incentivize redevelopments of sites. If they meet certain criteria, they can actually reduce their landscaping, but still require it in pockets, strategic pockets, to make sure that it's creating a streetscape that's appropriate and aesthetically pleasing, but reducing those requirements to incentivize that redevelopment. Parking, we heard a lot about parking as well. People that don't want to see a sea of asphalt, people that want to make sure that they have access to their uses. So we did go through the code and redesign the parking minimums. We put in minimums and maximums for each district. We allow shared parking scenarios when there are different uses with different peak times for their uses. We allow incentives for EV charging stations, and we also require a pedestrian and connectivity plan for new residential developments that are 5 or more lots, multifamily, commercial, and industrial uses. This impact study is similar to like a traffic impact study, but it's for pedestrians, showing where the existing pedestrian systems are, where the connections potentially could be, and gives the power back to the Planning Commission to decide where those connections should be made. Sign regulations was another big issue that we heard, both from the stakeholders and the community, as well as staff. So we spent a lot of time on sign regulations. In some places, we relax the requirements for signs along some of our developed corridors, because we know there are existing non-conforming signs within those corridors, such as East Main Street, Memorial Drive. And it allows the staff to look at the average setback for those signs and to allow those signs to be placed within that area administratively without going through the variance process. We also reorganized the code to regulate signs by sign type. We did this to avoid any content-based regulations. It's strictly based on size, time, place, and manner regulations, so that we aren't infringing on any kind of First Amendment issues. And then we provide a menu of options. So somebody can choose a wall sign, a ground sign, an awning sign, and they can have any of those as long as they don't exceed the total maximum square footage for their particular zoning district. Accessory structures, we allow those to encroach into side and rear setbacks, and then we added a cumulative maximum square footage for all accessory structures on a lot. We also added some additional requirements, architectural requirements. We did have in the survey from the community an overwhelming support of residents who wanted architectural requirements for various types of uses. And so based upon that feedback, we felt it was appropriate to include those in there. We also utilized model language that we've utilized in other communities throughout Central Ohio that have been effective and have not been a barrier to anything moving forward. So I feel that we have a balance there as well. In the enforcement section, we added some additional inspections into the enforcement that will allow for incremental citations with escalating penalties if they fail to comply as they continue to move through that process. And it does not prohibit any other type of enforcement, such as going to court or any civil matter. This is just another remedy, another tool in the tool bucket for enforcing the code. We also added some regulations for community gardens. We have received a lot of feedback throughout our community engagement process that community gardens are something that the city would like to see as far as residents. So we've added some language in there as well. And then last but not least, we put together the zoning map, and it's obviously a very large city on a small screen, but it will be uploaded once it's adopted into the GIS system so that you can able to click and find out what your zoning district is and correlate that back to your color-coded zoning code. So with that, I think that this this is my last slide. Yep, just open it up to questions now.
Holly, I've got a quick question. If you've got a lot of signs that are non-conforming, what happens if this gets adopted?
They continue to be non-conforming. They can continue in their current status. We did try to allow those signs to be administratively approved within that average setback along certain corridors. But if they're even outside of that, they would continue in their non-conforming status. They'd be allowed to continue.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, was there any discussion on the possible impact of affordable housing as a big issue?
Yeah.
And the new standards, I think, are gonna make that harder. So I don't know what would be the process. If we adopt this standard, then I feel like you're asking for problems with new developers that have to meet the standards because it's going to add cost.
So a couple of things with that. The standards are actually pretty common standards that I find around Central Ohio. So they've been implemented, and actually the builders have been redoing their plans based upon these common standards that they're finding around Central Ohio. Second of all, when you think about affordable housing, when I get on the, and my husband can contest to this because he's in the affordable housing industry and he's part of our business. There are certain architectural standards they have to meet in order to get federal funding for affordable housing, and they are really not that much different than what we have. There's a couple little things that are little tweaks to that, but there are standards that you have to get for affordable housing as well, because they want longevity in their product. They want it to last because they're investing in that for funding from the community, for the community.
Was there actual discussion in your process?
I'm sorry, yes, there
about
was.
affordable
Yeah,
housing?
so we had Linda Disser at the meeting. She was a very good spokesperson for that and provided feedback throughout the conversation of all three drafts, yes.
And she wasn't concerned about it?
Not that I'm aware of. She did not bring it up at the meeting.
Councilperson Ehlers?
Yeah, so I have a few questions along with the general statement. You said that they're redoing their standards to fit what is now in process. Well, if you have a new regulations and rule, you have to redo your standards to fit that regulation. You can't just not follow the regulation. So you have to redo your standards. Along with affordable housing, I have concerns because, as many of us are aware, the city of Lancaster has a median income of $50,000 a year, and 15% of our citizens live in poverty, which is above both the state and federal levels. When you, specifically in your architectural section, you have sections where you're listing you have to have so many materials on a certain percentage of the front of your house, or you have a second right-of-way facing, you have to add all these other design standards. When you add all those standards together, you do nothing but increase the cost to build. And in doing so, it makes it harder to add those affordable housings because you're making it more expensive, which means the price to pay to buy that home is now more expensive. So I have concerns there. I also have concerns with, in general, with those same standards, you're telling citizens who buy a plot of land that they are not allowed to build. Now, in my ward, I live in the first ward. I represent the first ward, which is the west side. I have the Overlook development and I have the Misty Meadows development. I drove through there and I spoke with about 75 constituents in that area by knocking on their doors. I counted 20 houses built in the last year that year and a half that do not fit these standards. Those houses cost between $300,000 and $500,000. And I don't understand how we are going to communicate to our citizens that, that's a fine house, but yeah, it sure costs you a lot of money, but you can't build that anymore. There's also 2 houses right off of the Fair Avenue, which are not in a development, that were built this year that do not fit those standards. So I have concerns with, in general, how that's going to limit future development and future investment, and taking away the right to build your own home. As well, I spoke to contractors who told me to add, if you had a corner lot with those second right-of-way and the frontal regulations that we are trying to put in place here, that you could potentially add $25,000 to $70,000 to a cost of build by adding those regulations. I have two more statements, and then I'll ask a question. One, on section C4 of 114703, which deals with the second right-of-way facing portion. I don't personally understand what's so wrong with a blank wall. Several and most homes in the city that have blank walls in that area, so I don't know what's wrong with that. And after I finish, I would just like a clarification as to why this was put forward. Because the way I look at it and the way some of my constituents felt was that when you are asking them to put all these extra parts in, some of those are extra entryways into their home, which to them makes them feel less safe, is what I heard from few of my residents. And I didn't just go around picking exactly which, how I would explain it to them. I brought that section with me and let them read it.
Sure.
So I wasn't just trying to push them to my side. So I would like a little bit of clarification there. And second, I just wanted to know, other than the Franklin County cities, is there any cities in our surrounding counties like Licking or
Yes.
Perry or
Yes.
Pickaway that these sort of standards are in place? Because
Yes.
it really concerns me.
Yeah. Okay, so trying to recap on all of your questions. First of all, on the blank wall, I think the biggest thing is just having, just no breaking up of that wall and it just looks like a visual wall as you drive down the road. Even if landscaping was added to it, just to break that up would make a lot of sense in most eyes. So it's obviously something that, it's your opinion versus my opinion on that particular issue. But I will say that Pete has verified that if a elevation faces a public right-of-way, by the building code, they're required to do 8% of open air. So most likely, adding a window or adding those three elements is going to be partially required by that building code already as well. So we're really not adding everything it's not all zoning. There's portion of it that would be required through that building code as well. As far as the other communities and other surrounding counties, Licking County, I do a lot of work in Licking County, and we are implementing them in Licking County as well. So it's not just Franklin County, it's the entire central region. And when I say that developers are adjusting, what I'm saying is that because so many communities are adopting what I'm almost calling a minimum standard, there are communities with much more. There's places, Dublin, and different places like that have way more than what we're proposing here. I would consider these just the minimum. And what I'm hearing is that these developers have already changed their plans. They have plans that are going to comply with these. So I don't think that it's anything above and beyond what they really need to do right now. And I think when we hear from the BIA, they had no issues. That was in there when they reviewed it, and they had no concerns with those architectural standards.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else with questions? Okay, Councilperson Teener.
Well, I would just like to ask you, did somebody, when you took this on, did somebody ask you before this committee even met what they wanted to see in the city before you even met with these people to look for? What ordinances to pull?
So did I meet with city staff?
Anybody tell you what they would like to have seen, and that's kind of where you based with the committee, what you discussed?
So, city staff, obviously, we had a conversation with city staff.
What they wanted to see in the city?
Yes,
Okay.
and then and then that's why we did the whole engagement process of talking to developers and landowners and business owners, and not just the stakeholder committee, but people who are out there in, building and developing as well.
Well, I've talked to quite a few residents, I've talked to realtors, I've talked to some business owners and that, and they think it's very restrictive. I know as a single person, I grew up in a house, ranch house, shutters. Actually, it was aluminum. It was built in 1963, but I did a little tour of homes this past weekend. I know there was a different tour of homes, but I did a tour of home of the council people because I didn't really know where everybody lived. And I looked at their houses, and I think about 5 of them is 100% vinyl.
I thought I saw you outside my house.
She was peeking in the windows, but anyway.
Hope she didn't get a show.
I did drive-bys, and it was a free tour, too. But I wanted to see, and I see people redoing their houses in vinyl. They're trimming their windows. Habitat. I think it's going to be restrictive on habitat.
Yeah,
To build houses. And there's nothing in a sea of vinyl. I don't go down a street and go, oh man, look at all this vinyl siding. And there's nothing wrong. This is affordable for people. I can't afford to have a stone house or a 50% of something. People have to sometimes build a home. Sometimes they don't have a porch yet. They have a stoop down. They have maybe foliage at both sides, and they work at it. It's going to cause people more money, plus the property taxes are going to be a lot higher for somebody. And this is not affordable. We always preach about affordable housing all the time. You can have something like that and it look nice. And as to Overlook, that place is gorgeous over there. I don't know what the problem is. I don't see a lot of stone on those houses. They're really nice. And I think it's very restrictive for people. And I just don't think it's going to be you talk about eyesores or whatever. I'll tell you what an eyesore is to me, and I know people can do it. I don't care that they do it. It's up to them. But these daggone solar panels on top of people's roofs, it looks like big old toy boxes, I don't think it's very attractive, but people do it. I don't care. But I don't think there's anything wrong with vinyl siding and that. It's just, there's just nothing wrong with it.
Well, like I said, we did talk to a number of people, and in this community survey also.
But if you want to
responded
live in a
back.
condominium place, if you want to live in the historic district, you want to live in a housing development and have ordinances plus rules on top of it, but Lancaster shouldn't be an HOA. People should be able to build, I understand some restrictions, but we shouldn't live under the umbrella of an HOA. If you want to go to one of those places or go to Worthington, Dublin, wherever they have that, go ahead. Go live there. But I think it's too restrictive for people, and I don't think people can afford it.
Okay, thank you. Any other council person? Ms. Craig said, okay.
Go ahead.
I just have a couple quick questions, and one may have been my hearing. During your presentation, you said that when it went before review with the zoning commission, that they recommended architectural design suggestions, changes. Did you say they were adopted or were not adopted?
So the planning commission reviewed it with the architectural design standards in it and did not recommend any changes to it. So everything that you see in there was presented to them and unanimously voted to move forward to you as is.
Apologies, it was a little difficult
That's okay.
to hear everything. And then I know that you said that for community engagement, there was a survey sent out through social media. How did we reach our residents that are non-social media users?
Yeah, I believe that there was the ability to call in and ask for paper copies of the survey. I don't believe that we had any of those requested, but there was that ability to do that.
How would they have found out about that if they weren't on social media?
I don't. Do you guys have a method for letting them out? No? Okay.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Councilperson?
Once again, thank you so much for coming. I enjoyed the presentation. I do want to applaud your efforts for simplifying, and I'm about 3/4 of the way through the whole thing, and when I hit the architectural requirements, I started to get a little heartburn, but we aren't going to get into the details of that. But I like the section on solar panels because my last month's bill was $0. And my neighbors don't even know the panels are on the roof.
Yep. Good. Well, thank you.
Do we have any other questions from any council members?
Mr. President.
Yes.
I just have more of a couple of comments. Holly, would you tell us again how many community members responded to your survey?
There were over 200. I'd have to look up the exact number, but it was,
But a
yeah.
pretty good amount.
Yes.
Based on
correct.
your experience, is that average or more?
That is right around average. I usually get somewhere between 150 to 300 responses, so you're right there in the middle.
Okay, and then during our meetings, which Mr. Matlin and I both participated in, as we went, you mentioned Linda as one of the persons when we discussed design standards, but we discussed those in detail. And I share some of your concerns, Mr. Ehlers. What I would say is we have a process in place that I believe the way, and anyone feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but we have a BZA process. If someone is building an infill home, which I think is one of the concerns you had, others have, they can go to BZA, and if that infill home is matching the character of the neighborhood, that variance is going to be granted. I have spoken with BZA members, and they essentially, there is a filing fee. It's in my opinion, it's rather low, and it's to cover the cost of copies, and the BZA members do get a small fee for the hearing. It's $150. But I believe, if necessary, I believe BZA and law director, correct me if I'm wrong, they can waive that fee if there's a indigent person or someone. Is that true? So that fee could be waived if someone didn't have the $150 to bring that before BZA. But I think the concerns are legitimate, but I also think we have a mechanism in place to address those concerns. And I think also mentioned, and Mr. Vail can chime in if he'd like, a lot of these things are already included in the building code that, yes, they're part of our zoning code, but they're part of our zoning code because the building codes have changed and been updated over the years, and now we've included those in the zoning code. So even if we were to remove some of them, it may be required by the building code anyway. And I think you already mentioned one.
Mm-hmm.
So before we undo the work of the committee, which we certainly have the authority to do, and there's a process that's a little bit different than regular legislation because our planning commission, which is organized under 713 of the Ohio Revised Code, which I read today, has, based on what we've given them, authority to do a lot of things and make decisions in their deliberative body. They had a public hearing. They had people attend that public hearing. They expressed, one was the architectural standard issue. Admittedly, it wasn't a large turnout, but I was there. Others were there. I listened. The Planning Commission did discuss things. They did offer changes. They were incorporated into the legislation that we see in front of us. Before we throw this out because we have a difference in opinion on architectural standards, I think we ought to take the time. We have almost 3 months from the time it was brought to us before we have to make a decision. So read, talk to people, Mr. Ehlers. I admire that you've talked to a lot of people. I've talked to a few people too. We have information from BIA that, they've spoken with developers in the city that have no concerns and they actually support the standard. So I don't think, we're obviously not making a decision tonight. I just thought we impaneled this committee. We brought in an advisor to lead us through that who has expertise in that area. We worked through changing a code that was just handed to us, to be honest with you, from, Tulsa, Oklahoma, I believe, that does not fit this community, does not serve this community, but we made it work for 20-some years. It's time for an upgrade, and it's time for improvements, and it's time for us to consider those things. Certainly, if this body feels there needs to be changes at some point, we have the authority to do that. There's a process for that that's a little different than just voting no. I believe if we amend it, it has to go back to Planning Commission.
If you amend the Planning Commission's recommendation, it has to be approved by 2/3 of the council. No? Three-fourths.
Lancaster codified ordinance requires it to go back to planning commission.
Oh,
ORC
okay.
does not,
Yeah.
Lancaster codified
Okay,
ordinance.
so it would have to go back to the planning commission, no matter what.
So those are considerations, and all I really want to do is tell you about my time on this committee. It was a discussion. Holly didn't just bring in a draft and we just went with it. There was significant discussion. As a matter of fact, our 2-hour meetings were sometimes longer than 2 hours, and as she said, I believe 8+ meetings.
Yeah.
And I was able to attend every one of those meetings, and they were good give and take, and a lot of pros and cons, and a lot of changes made at the meeting because of the input from this committee. So that's for your consideration. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any further comments? Yes,
I just have one
Councilperson
question.
Naylor.
The survey you did, is there any way that the council could get a copy of those results?
Absolutely. We have a report on that I can send to Teresa to get out to you guys.
Thank you.
I have one follow-up.
Yes, Councilperson Kreitz.
Sorry. Did we happen to consider having a preferred materials list versus a required, similar to what Pickerington has?
I don't think we discussed that. I think we discussed the actual materials and went back and forth on the materials, but we didn't discuss preferred versus required.
Last call. Anybody else? Councilperson
Actually,
Teener.
it isn't about this. Can I ask a question about something else on the presentation? Are we?
Sure,
Okay.
go ahead.
The accessory structure for the encroachment, what does that mean? What are you talking about, actually? Just,
Sure, yeah. So what it means is instead of being required to meet the side and the rear setback for the lot,
Okay.
that the accessory structure can actually go into that side or rear lot line, but no closer than 5 feet to the lot line, unless it abuts an alley. And then when, in those particular cases, there has to be 20 feet, so that if it's like a garage, they can park their car there. There's enough room
how
for that.
about building a structure onto somebody's, that's already done? Are things gonna be grandfathered in?
Oh, yes. Anything that is existing that's legally existing prior to, on the date of the adoption,
Okay.
becomes existing, legally non-conforming, and can continue in its current
Okay,
status.
so if somebody illegally built something on somebody's property, is that going to be okayed?
If it's illegal,
That's what I'm just making sure.
Yep.
Because I've had fence questions with
Yep.
people and that,
no,
so.
no. If it's illegal, it's illegal, whether it's this code or that
Whether
code,
it's
it's
the
illegal.
city's going to enforce it is the issue. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, with all of those questions, I thank you, Ms. Matty. We appreciate the work of the committee. We appreciate your work. We know it's been a large undertaking, and we look forward to the continuing discussions that we're going to have.
All right, great. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
All right, back to the agenda, petitions and memorials.
There are none to be presented.
Okay, at this time, we allow voters and taxpayers an opportunity to address council. Is there anybody here this evening who would like to address council? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on. We go to the reports of standing committees.
I have two. Water Pollution Control Meeting minutes dated June 14th, 2023, submitted by Mr. James, and the Finance Committee meeting minutes dated June 26th, 2023, submitted by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of standing committees.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to file the reports of standing committees. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We now go to the reports of special committees.
There are none to be presented.
Okay. We have no public hearings, so we'll go to reading of resolutions. Third reading, temporary resolution 6023.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance in the sanitation fund 6005 and to amend the certificate of appropriations with the Fairfield County Auditor, offered by Mr. Matlin and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
I make a motion, council pass and gross and enter upon the written record, resolution temporarily numbered 6023.
Second?
Is there any discussion, Mr. Matlin?
Just as a reminder, this is for sanitation. We, several meetings ago, approved them to go out and build a new transfer station, which they're borrowing the money for. This allows them to spend in the neighborhood of $52,000 to make an interest-only payment this December on that loan.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Okay. We're now moving to temporary resolution. Oh, excuse me. Temporary resolution 6023 passed 9-0. Temporary resolution 60-23.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a contract for construction of the 2023 sewer rehabilitation project, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Thank you, Chairman Porter.
Yeah.
At this time, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution numbered 62-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 6023. 6223, excuse me. Bear with me this evening, folks. Is there any discussion?
I think I need to add some information to that, just as a reminder for everybody. This particular one has to do with the sewer rehabilitation for several of the sewers in the city that are basically in disrepair. And this particular kind of, I should say repair, has to do with in place and sealing of it. And it's about a $1.25 million construction contract that we want to go ahead and pass so that the city service director can enter into that contract.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on temporary resolution 62-23? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution number 6223 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 6323.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate with the county auditor and the city income tax fund 2016, offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Councilperson McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporary numbered 6323.
Second?
Do you have any discussion?
Yes, Mr. President. This is regarding our income tax department, and I have to refresh my memory here, but this has to do with the self-employment tracking and reporting. It's pretty standard, and we discussed it in detail at the Finance Committee meeting when this was presented.
Any further discussion on 6323? Or 6423? 6323. I had another check there, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Okay. Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
No.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
No.
Temporary resolution 6323 passes 7-2. Temporary resolution 6423.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance in the general fund 1001 and to amend the certificate of appropriations with the Fairfield County Auditor, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Councilperson McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 6423.
Second.
Any discussion? Councilperson McDaniel.
Yeah, this is from the Safety Director's request. This has to do with some grant funding that was received that we appropriated, and this is a reimbursement from the NOPEC grant funds that the city received.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 6423 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 6523.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the construction of the AHA Trails project, offered by Mr. Matlin and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Councilperson Matlin.
Mr. President, I make a motion that council pass and gross enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 6523.
Second?
Councilperson Matlin, any discussion?
As a reminder, this is to appropriate, to spend money to build a trail behind the AHA Museum. It's all grant money. It's been going on for about a year. It allows them to spend it. It was already budgeted and planned. It's approximately $115,000.
Any further discussion on temporary resolution 6523? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
No.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 6523 passes 8-1. Temporary resolution 6623.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for engineering design for the concentrate line upgrades, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Councilperson James.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Porter. At this time, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution numbered 66-23.
Second?
We have a motion to suspend the rules for a third reading on temporary resolution 6623. Any discussion?
Yeah, briefly, as a reminder, this particular concentrate line comes from the South Water Plant all the way to the Lawrence Street wastewater treatment plant, and over the years has had some issues with not having enough flow to allow occlusion of material building up in it. We've done a lot of preliminary design work. Now it's time to finish the last few things to make sure this becomes a completely efficient line to discharge the material that comes from the water treatment process.
Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
The motion to suspend the third reading on temporary resolution 6623 passes 9-0. Back to
Thank you again, President Pro Tem. At this time, I would like to make a motion that council pass and engross and enter upon a written record temporary resolution numbered 66-23.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass temporary resolution 6623. Any further discussion?
Nothing further for me, thank you.
Okay. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Okay, we have the second reading on temporary resolution 6723.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into construction contracts for the lateral D trunk sewer Phase 2 in the Campground Road Pump Station and Force Main, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Mr. James.
Thank you again, President Pro Tem Porter. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 67-23.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to suspend the third reading of temporary resolution 6723. Discussion?
Once again, briefly, as a reminder, this is the complete lateral D sewer line that has to run out near Campground Road, and it also involves the Campground Road Pump Station. This is in the amount of about $25 million, and the reason we're asking for suspension on the third reading is to get some of these things started to enjoy at least some of the weather for construction.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion to suspend the third reading of temporary resolution 6723? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Okay. The motion to suspend the third reading of temporary resolution 6723 passes 9-0. We're on to temporary resolution 6723.
Thank you again, President Porter, Pro Tem Porter. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon a written record temporary resolution 67-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass temporary resolution 6723. Any further discussion?
Nothing further, thank you.
Okay. Hearing no further discussion, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Okay, the temporary resolution 6723 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 6823.
A resolution approving the City of Lancaster's fiscal year 2023 Community Development Block Grant Annual Action Plan and Statement of Objectives and authorizing their submission to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Offered by Mr. Ailes and seconded by Mr. Schoonover.
Councilperson Ailes.
Second of three readings, please.
Second of three readings of temporary resolution 6823. Temporary resolution 6923.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate with the county auditor and the general fund 1001 for the Chestnut Street parking lot. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Councilperson McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporary numbered 6923.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the third reading of temporary resolution 6923. Discussion?
Yes, Mr. President, this is the funding mechanism for the Chestnut Street parking lot. We approved legislation last week that would authorize that. This is how it would be paid for.
Any further discussion on the motion to suspend the third reading of temporary resolution 6923? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend the third reading of temporary resolution 6923 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 6923.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 6923.
Second?
We have a motion to pass temporary resolution 6923. Do we have any further discussion?
Nothing further.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
So it says $450,000, but then one of the whereases also says $25,000 for inspections.
Yeah, it's still a total of $450,000.
So it's a total, it's not
Yes.
450 plus?
Right.
Okay.
That's a good question. And we are going out to bid this Friday for this project. Hopefully, we'll be able to get some bids here for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on temporary resolution 6923? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Excuse me. Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Okay. Temporary resolution 6923 passes 9-0. We are now on to first reading of temporary resolution 7123.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids for the Fetters Run Ohio University Lancaster Stream Restoration Project, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Councilperson James.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Porter. This is the first of three readings.
First of three readings on temporary resolution 7123. Temporary resolution 7223.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for the design of the East Main Street Sewer Separation Project, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Councilperson James.
Thank you again, President Pro Tem Porter. This is the first of two readings.
First of two readings on temporary resolution 7223. Temporary resolution 7323.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids for the Independence Boulevard and East Main Street Culvert Replacement Projects, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Councilperson James.
Thank you again. This is the first of two readings. Which one are we on? 7323?
Yeah, 7323.
First of two readings.
Okay, first of two readings on temporary resolution 7323. Temporary Resolution 7423.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for the construction administration services on the Independence Boulevard and East Main Street Culvert Replacement Project, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Councilperson James.
Thank you once again. This is the first of 3 readings.
First of 3 readings on Temporary Resolution 7423. Now we're on to the reading of ordinances. Oh, sorry. Are there any more resolutions to come before council at this time? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on to the reading of ordinances. We're on to the 3rd reading of Temporary Ordinance 1323.
An ordinance to amend permanent ordinance 37-22, repeal and replace existing permanent ordinance 37-22, and to declare an emergency for the non-union pay ordinance, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Councilperson McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to replace resolution temporarily number, ordinance temporarily numbered 1323 by replacing it with ordinance 1323 stars given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second to replace temporary ordinance 1323 with temporary ordinance 1323 star as presented in writing to the clerk prior to the meeting. Discussion?
Yes, Mr. President. Through our deliberations here at council and some thought and some input received by several council members and honestly something I thought might be helpful as we deliberated this piece over time. This changes the start date from immediately for these positions, and specifically we're talking about the tax auditor position and the additional zoning inspector position. It moves the start date from immediately to December 1st, 2023.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion to replace with 1323 with 1323 star? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
No.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Okay, the motion to replace temporary ordinance 1323 with temporary ordinance 1323 star passes 8-1.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 1323 star.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass and engross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 1323 star. Discussion?
I have nothing further.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
No.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
No.
And Mrs. Teener.
No.
6 to 3.
Okay. Temporary ordinance 13-23 star passes 6-3. First reading of temporary ordinance 1423.
An ordinance to repeal and replace Lancaster Codified Ordinance, Part 11, Planning and Zoning Code, Title 3, Zoning and Property Restrictions, Chapter 1121 through Chapter 1161, including Appendix B and C of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Lancaster, offered by Mr. Ayers and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Councilperson Ayers.
First of 3 readings.
First of 3 readings on temporary ordinance 1423. Yes, and we also have a public hearing on that, which will occur on Monday, August 4th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. Are there any other ordinances for council this evening? Okay, tabled legislation?
Yes, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion, council remove from the table resolution temporarily numbered 5223.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to remove from the table temporary ordinance 5223. This isn't debatable, so we please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to remove from the table temporary ordinance 5223 passes 9-0.
Resolution.
Excuse me, resolution. Sorry about that.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion the council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 5223.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass temporary resolution 5223. Discussion.
Yes, Mr. President, this is the funding mechanism for the zoning inspector. It also has in the legislation money that we need to appropriate to pay for benefits for a current city planner.
Any further discussion? Councilperson Ayers.
Will the extra money that's proposed in there just roll over into the general fund next, when it's done?
That's correct.
It's not spent.
We will not be able to spend it until the hire date, so it's specifically for that employee.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on temporary ordinance 5223? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
No.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 5223 passes 8-1. Is there anything further?
Wait a second here. Bear with me 1 second.
Mr. President, I have another item on the table I'd like to discuss.
Okay. Sure.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council remove from the table ordinance temporarily numbered 1123.
We have a motion on the table to remove temporary ordinance 1123 from the table. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second to remove temporary ordinance 1123 from the table. This is non-debatable, so please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
The motion to withdraw temporary ordinance 1123 from the table passes 9-0.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to withdraw from consideration temporary ordinance 1123.
We have a motion to withdraw from consideration temporary ordinance 1123. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to withdraw temporary ordinance 1123. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. President, as a result of passing temporary ordinance 1323 star, temporary ordinance 1123 becomes moot.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to withdraw temporary ordinance 1123 passes 9-0. Do we have any other tabled legislation to come before council this evening? No. Hearing none, unfinished business? Councilperson Teener.
Oh, but you're looking around me.
Yep.
Actually, this is to Stephanie, and I'm not honestly not trying to put you on the spot, but everybody on Facebook right now has become firework attorneys right now. And you're hearing this can happen, that can happen, we're allowed to do this, we're allowed to do that. Can you tell what the ordinance is or the law is for shooting off fireworks in the city? It seems to be a debate everywhere.
So, the state code changed, and when the state code changed, I provided everybody with the Ohio Department of Commerce's handout that lets you know what size fireworks you can shoot off and when you can shoot those off. I apologize, I don't have that in front of me at the moment, and I don't know all of the regulations, but if you go to the Ohio Department of Commerce's website, where I got that handout from, anybody can get that. And then I know that the police department and the fire department have those as well, because folks are asking. It's a period before and after each of the major federal holidays in the state of Ohio. But I apologize, I don't know the exact dates. You can find those online on the.
Right, well, I guess my thing is too, where can you do you know where you can and can't shoot them off? You can't shoot them off of a street, you can't shoot them off of a park.
Correct.
I'm so sorry, that's, I think, because that was a big
Yeah,
debate.
no, you can't shoot them off any place except your own private property. City right-of-way, you can't
Right.
use other people's property, nothing like that. It has to be from your own private property.
Okay, that was like one of the biggest discussions, was where you could actually shoot them off from and
Okay.
not the street.
Yeah, I don't know the size and, like I said, the
Right.
dates, but if you look at that Ohio Department of Commerce website, it gives all of that information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other unfinished business? Any new business? Councilperson Ayers.
Paul, if you know, and if you don't, it's fine. Do you have any update on the City Hall renovations at all from, I know we passed a resolution to look into that a few months ago now. I just wondered if you have any sort of update.
So, I want to have some discussion with certain council members, trying to put a group together to see how we would finance that. And, that's something that some have volunteered to assist. I have to be careful who can be on that, because I can't have more than 2 members on any subcommittee. So I have to have a member from each, not each individual, but just a group of you to talk about that financing options. I mean, obviously, to do this project, it's, right now, the number is about $13.5 million to do the renovation of what we recommend. But how you temporarily fund that till the project is done, and then how do we move that? Do we move that to mutual funds and things like that, finance? Those are all things that have to be discussed and brought before council. You would authorize any of the funding options that we did. So the city auditor, city treasurer, law director, the mayor, myself, and then some of you would try to look at what options that we would go forward with.
Thank you.
Any other new business? Hearing none, we will go to the announcements of scheduled meetings.
The next regular scheduled meeting of council is July 17th. The meeting following is August 14th. Both meetings here at 6:30 PM. At the August 14th meeting, there will be a public hearing on temporary ordinance 14-23. Upcoming committee meetings for the next 30 days. Code enforcement, July 10th at 7:30 AM at the 1897 conference room. Water pollution, July 12th at 8:30 AM at the 1897 conference room. Finance, July 17th at 6 PM here in council chambers. Economic development, July 20th at 7:30 AM at the 1897 conference room. And finally, the IT telecom, July 21st at 8 AM at the 1897 conference room.
Reading of bills.
There is one bill payable to PNC for publication of legislation in the MNCO paper for $149.80.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion, we pay the bill.
Second.
We have a motion and second to pay the outstanding bill. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. See no need for an executive session this evening. I would take a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Please sign your legislation before you take off. Thank you for your patience and